Okay, so now we have some users entered. I'm going to log out and I'm going to log back in as one of the users we just created. So this is what those users will see. Just so you know, when they first get their account or you've reset their password, they'll go to the screen that says, please reset your password. And then after that's my old password. I got to put a new one. I'll just use our test123 password. Okay, so now I can log in with my regular test123. And so now we'll see my standard dashboard. So it says I'm expected to work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And so far I've entered no time for this payroll period. Okay, so this is the standard dashboard. I'll cover a couple of things in here before we move on to look at the timesheet. One that you'll see frequently is this payroll period selector. And that's kind of how the system is really organized, is into payroll periods. It's not so much weeks or specific dates. So I can click back and forth to different payroll periods here. But I also have this jump to box, and there's a lot of things you can type in here. One that's really convenient is just to type the letter T and hit enter, and that will bring you back to whatever payroll period is going to contain today's date, although I don't know why that didn't jump. I can also put in a specific date, and that'll jump to whatever payroll period contains that date. So if I need to go find, hey, what did I do on a particular day? I can just type in that date. And if I need to go to a different year, I can actually type in a full year in there if I wanted to go back to 2019 or something crazy. And then the other thing that will appear here on my dashboard is as I do ag activity daily reports, and I do weights and measures inspections, and I do PUE activities, they're all going to compile in this grid here. That will tell me all the activities I've performed and how many total hours I've entered. So that's our landing page. And then I'm going to jump over to timesheet. We talked a little bit about the timesheet entry, particularly the straight entry, the simple tracking entry. But a couple of things we didn't really cover is how to operate the timesheet. So scroll this down into view a little bit. And one of the things we spent quite a bit of time working on is being able to navigate this via keyboard. So you can see I'm moving around in the timesheet, but I'm just using the arrow keys on my keyboard, or the enter key on my keyboard, or the tab key on my keyboard. It's very much like moving around in Excel. It's one of the things I really dislike about timesheet systems in the past is how you had to keep switching between the keyboard and the mouse all the time. Particularly in cases where you'll tend to enter the same thing over and over. So if I had 3 days of vacation, I can just type 8, enter, then a right arrow key, 8, hit enter, 8, hit enter. So it's really quite quick to move around. Another thing you'll notice is down here at the bottom underneath the time card, we added keyboard shortcuts for a lot of things. And so we put a little hint text down here that will show you, what keyboard shortcuts are available for the type of row you're looking at. So here it says hit Control Enter or start typing to edit. So I can just start typing. I want to put in 2. I can put in decimals, up to 3 decimals. If I try to type letters, it'll just ignore them. So it's not going to let me enter anything invalid. And I can also, I think I showed you this before, if I need to enter a remark on something, so I took leave without pay, I can just hit the R key and that will give me a remarks box. So oops, hope if I could spell names properly. And then we also cover in the user's manual, again, trying to keep things very keyboard focused for people who like to do time cards very quickly. If I just hit enter on a form like this, it's just going to save the form. And then also in all these forms, if I make a mistake, I can hit the escape key and that will just cancel out. Okay, when we get down to some of the non-direct entry rows, so I went from leave without pay, which is straight entry, to clerical direct. The same keys work. If I double click or I hit Control Enter, that'll pop up that entry form. And I can just tab my way through this form and okay, what other ones didn't we cover? I think that's it. So the one that we created was industrial hemp. And as I mentioned, even though I don't have industrial hemp listed on my time card, I can click Add Timesheet Row and it will give me access to any timesheet categories that I haven't already added to my time card or aren't on my default time card. So now I have the industrial hemp row, and if I go down here to, that's Saturday, Monday, if I want to enter time in here, I'll get a very short form, but this form is the form that we designed in the timesheet categories editor. So if you recall, we said we wanted to collect program, but agriculture is the only program we're going to allow. And then we created this custom field, acres inspected. We put in this hint text and we said it's going to be a decimal. So I could put in a decimal number. If I try to type text in here, you'll see it gives me a little exclamation point because the system looked at our field definition and said, nope, they need numbers in here, so don't allow any text. We also said this field is required, so if I try and save this form without typing in acres inspected, it will not let me, and it says acres inspected is required. So, and I did 6 hours on that, and then I can type in remarks. Okay, so you can kind of see that that custom form builder could be a pretty powerful tool, particularly if you have like an interim form that you need to report on. It'll collect all of that information, and then we can work with you on a custom report that will spit that out so that you can use that for your reporting requirements.
Okay.
Now, there's a few other buttons on the timesheet page I'd like to talk about. Let's talk about these exports first. So the first is export a timesheet report. This is what I call the CalCATS timesheet. So it's the very detailed timesheet. And we are still working a little bit on trying to make this a more easy to print format by creating a print area and some print titles and things like that. But as you can see, it's going to be every category that we actually entered time on. So we're not going to put in all the categories that we don't have time for. And it's the 14 days in the payroll period and all the time that we've entered. Then we have a second report, which is an audit report, which this one is still, even a little bit more of a work in progress, I would say, but it's more of a tabular listing, just a straight down the page listing of date, activity, what program or sub-program it was involved in, who the staff was, and how many hours there were. And then we have a third one, which is the payroll report. So if I export a payroll report, that's going to look very much like my CalCATS timesheet, but instead of listing all of the categories, the detailed categories that we have for ag and weights and measures and PUE and everything else, it maps everything to just the payroll categories that we've defined.
Okay.
So the goal of this timesheet format is going to be to make it easier for you to reconcile this against your payroll, either timesheets that you print out and sign, or if you have an online payroll system, the entries that have been made into the online payroll system. Okay. Then the last thing I want to mention is you'll see a thing here called Timesheet Status, and this is, if you've seen CalPEATS, then you know how us CaliCo folks think about statuses. There's in progress, there's in review, and then there's approved. So as an employee, once I finish filling out my time card, it's going to be my responsibility to move this into review status, which basically is the action of electronically signing my timesheet and passing it to my supervisor to review.
Okay.
So let me put in a few more hours here. I'm going to need some hours here. And then let's say I went and did NOI reviews for a few days. Okay. So now I've got my requisite number of hours. If I go look at my dashboard, oh, I'm still short on Friday.
Oh.
So let me go back to Friday the 10th. I only had 3.5 hours here. And let's say I took 4.5 hours of sick leave. There we go, green across the board. And so I'm going to go ahead and submit my timesheet to my supervisor to be reviewed. Now, it's not totally obvious from the screen, but if I now try and type in any, hear me tapping on the keyboard, I can't make any changes now because I've submitted this for review to my supervisor. And the only way I'm going to be able to make edits to this is if my supervisor kicks it back into in progress. So I'm going to go ahead and log out, and I'm going to log back in as the supervisor account that we created. I'm going to do this password change real quick. So as a supervisor, of course, I've got my own work to do and my own time cards to fill out and so forth. But under the admin menu here, I'm going to have a timesheet review menu item. And that is going to show me my time card, if I've started entering one, and the time cards for any staff that report to me, including the hierarchy of supervisors. Okay, so I see employee biologist 1, they put their timesheet in review. It's ready for me to review. They have 80 hours entered. They have 80 hours were expected. Now, after a while, I begin to trust this employee. They do their time card right every payroll period. I may not need to go look at it. I can just hit the approve button and go ahead and approve their time card here. Or I may want to actually take a look at their time card. So I'm going to go ahead and hit view. And you'll notice here at the top, there's a big red banner that says you're viewing the timesheet for biologist 1. That's just to make sure that the person that's logged in, supervisor 1, knows this isn't their time card. They're looking at somebody else's time card, and they can't edit it here directly. So if I see this 8 hours of NOI review, and I know that on that day you weren't doing NOI review, you were issuing ag permits, and I want you to move that 8 hours from here to here, I can't do it. What I'll need to do is kick your timesheet back into in progress status and shoot you a note saying you got it wrong for the 14th. You need to move that time to RMP ag. If I do believe that your timesheet's fine, I can go ahead and approve it. But let's say I need to kick it back into in progress, but this employee is out sick for the rest of the payroll period, and they can't come in and modify their time card. And we need to get this approved and done so we can get payroll run and everything else. So in order to allow one user to edit another user's time, we created this assume identity function, right? So under my menu, because if you recall, when we set up the supervisor role, we added that assume user identity permission. So I now can click log in as, and I can log in as one of the biologists that I supervise.
Okay.
And there's a big warning here that's if you if you misuse this, we might get mad at you. So don't log in as somebody else and do silly things on their timesheet is basically what we're saying. So I'm going to log in as biologist 1. And now we'll see this turns red. It's just to remind me, hey, whatever I'm doing in the system right now, it thinks I'm biologist 1, but we also want to let everyone know, it also knows that I'm actually that test user 1, or county admin. And everything that happens during this sort of impersonation session, we log with both IDs. So we know that it wasn't actually biologist 1 logged in, it was supervisor or county admin acting as biologist 1 that was in here doing these activities.
Oh, good.
So then I can go ahead and say, all right, let me put this back into progress. Oh, let me do this in the right sequence. Let me kick it back into progress as the supervisor. And then let me go log in as biologist 1. And then I can modify this timesheet and I can take this 8 hours out of here and I can put that 8 hours in here. And because I did that, I'm probably going to want to put in a remark. And then I can submit that time card again. So that's how we took, made accommodation for that fact that you're going to have people that are out of office and you need their supervisor or their supervisor's supervisor to be able to go in and make these changes. Just be aware that, we'll know as the system, if you ever need to know who actually made that change, we'll have the audit logs that will say which user was logged in doing that. And then when that person is finished doing that work, they'll just click on resume my identity, which is the same language we use for this feature in CalAg permits when you assume a web user login. And then I can go look at biologist 1's time card and I can approve it. And once it's approved, it drops off of, it's on my list as approved, and I can move on to the other people whose time cards are on here to review. Okay, that's timesheet entry. Let's talk about ag activity entry for a minute, because as we talked about, I'm going to log back out and log in as the biologist. So on my time card, I have this ag activity row. And for a lot of biologists, that's going to be a big chunk of their time is completing ag activities. So in order to complete ag activities, I have an ag activities dashboard. And this will tell me for this payroll period, here's all the daily reports I've filled out. I don't have any right now, so I'll click on new activity. Now the new activity gives me a big long list of all kinds of things, right? These are all ag activities. These are all weights and measures activities. These are all PUE activities. If I click on these, it'll kick me over into CalPETS and get me to log in and start a new inspection over there. But for a lot of people, they really only deal with 2 or 3 or 4 of these programs here. So we've added on their profile page a way to custom configure that button to make it easier for them. So I'm going to go in as biologist 1, and I'm going to manage my quick actions. I'm going to say what I normally do is pest detection, eradication, nursery, and apiary. Now when I go back to my ag activities, you'll see this now is turned into a quick drop down. So without having to click that and then go search through that screen and find the right one, I've just got the stuff that I do most often right here. Okay, all of the ag activity forms pretty much behave the same way. When you're looking at a blank form, you can go ahead and fill in the different components that you need to fill in. You can change the date before you enter a form. So if I'm actually entering data for last Friday, I can, switch the date. And for each day that I'm entering activities for, I can enter more than one activity form. So for each contract that I do work for, I can fill out a separate form. That's how we manage tracking the invoicing and billing for all of your contracts separately. So I think most counties kind of do that now by having people fill out, 2 paper daily forms, or in your existing systems, you may fill out 2 different forms for the same day. But before I can move on, you'll notice it says date entry is locked, timesheet is approved. So that's just to illustrate. Remember, we went ahead and submitted our timesheet for this time period. So I'm gonna have to march out into the future here to enter a form. Let's go to the 20th. Okay, so on the 20th, and I know this is in the future, but we don't really stop anyone from doing that. I'm gonna go do some pest detection activity. So I did commercial crop visual inspections, 2.5 hours. And that was 4 acres out of 6 gross and 1 property. Down here on trapping, this is where, we're getting a lot of discussion going around, this is what's required for CDFA's reporting through the CMR. But most counties are looking for something more like CalTrap for their trappers to actually fill out more of the details about their route books. So you may see some changes here in the not too distant future. But I may have gone and serviced 5 traps, added 2, and there's right now 10 in operation. For LVAM, and I didn't deal with EGVMs. So that form saves, and if I then go back to my timesheet, and this was for the 20th, you'll see that 2.5 hours has automatically been reflected on my timesheet.
Okay.
Now, if I then went and did some pest detection activity for Weed Abatement District 7, that's a separate contract. Then I can, let me cancel. I'm going to hit Add New Report. And I'm going to say, this is for Weed Abatement District 7. And for them, I went out and did some training activities. So we did 3.5 hours of training, didn't do any properties or miles, and we can save that form. So now at the top right, you'll see we get a little summary that shows up that says for this date, for 7/20, we have CDFA. If you don't specify a contract or a location, it assumes it's just generic CDFA work that will get accrued onto the annual financial summary. 2.5 hours for them and 3.5 hours for this contract work. And I can very quickly switch between the 2 reports. That's my 2.5 hour report, and this is my 3.5 hour report.
Well, that's nice.
Yep. And then if I made a mistake and I want to delete one, I can just click on the red X. The green arrow says this is the one I'm looking at right now, so I can delete this report. And I can add as many reports as I want on a day. Basically, each report has to have a separate date, contract, and or location. So even if I was working on one contract, say I'm working on a nursery contract and I went to 3 different nurseries, I can record each of those nurseries on a separate daily form.
Okay. Yeah.
And then last thing on here is after Amador County had been in production for a little while, they found that they were frequently, or at least seem to have the potential to accidentally enter the form for the wrong date. Right now, if I change this date, it's just going to show me whatever forms I have for that date, which is none. It doesn't change the date on the existing form. So if this weed abatement form was supposed to be filled out for the 21st, I can use this button and say this is actually supposed to be on 7/21. So now you see for 7/21, I've got the weed abatement district form. And if I go back to the 20th, I still have my CDFA form for the 20th. And all of that, again, will update automatically on the timesheet. So when I refresh that, you'll see the 2.5 on the 20th. And then if I double click on this one, you'll see the 3.5 here for the weed abatement district. So for a typical biologist who's primarily entering ag activity daily reports at the end of every day, they're going to be on this screen. This will be the screen they go to, and they'll use this new activity to basically jump through and enter all their dailies for the end of the day. And they can hop back to their timesheet and fill in if they had any comp time, sick time, office time, that type of thing.